The Toronto Raptors offense is ugly. It's a lot of dribbling, a lot of long twos, and not a lot of motion. The Raptors shoot worse from three, worse from the field, worse from the line, and have fewer assists than their opponent on a nightly basis. So how is it still working? How is a team that is missing so many bodies, missing Pascal Siakam, still managing to be a top 10 team in the NBA? What is this one mystery stat that is compensating for all of this offensive inefficiency? And how might all of this translate to when the Raptors inevitably make a long-rumored trade for a superstar like Kevin Durant? If you're new around here, my name is Robert, this is Pensari Basketball. Make sure to hit like, subscribe if you haven't already, grab your coffee, and let's get to it. There's an old saying that you should dress for the job you want, not the one you have. Well, the Toronto Raptors are building around a star that they want, not the one that they currently have. The way I see it, there are three possible outcomes. Either the star they have takes a monumental step, or that star takes enough of a step that he can be traded for a star that they actually want, or a budding star that's already on your roster becomes the star that many think that he can become. In either case, what the Raptors are building doesn't actually work without a top 5 player, especially if the goal, as stated, is championships. And for a team that is so strongly rooted in analytical experimentation, it is a stroke of genius to play the way you would if you already had the top 5 player you so covet, as opposed to wasting this time evaluating and developing into one style, only to have to completely gut it a year from now when the faces change. There's another saying that if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and that history tends to repeat itself. And the Raptors have done this exact thing before with DeMar DeRozan, where they swapped the star they had for the one they actually wanted. The one that didn't quite develop into the one that was already there.
Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green going north.
DeRozan, and the Spurs want to stay relevant.
I was told he's not too thrilled.
If Toronto can pull something amazing off, get Drake.
Is this the dagger?
Are the 2019 NBA champions?
If you look at the three teams in the NBA that lead the league in limiting turnovers, it's the Atlanta Hawks, the Dallas Mavericks, and the Toronto Raptors. And they have one very glaring similarity. They all lean very heavily into
HELIOCENTRISM.
Trae Young, Luka Doncic, Pascal Siakam. In Siakam's absence, you have seen Scottie Barnes, OG Anunoby, and Fred VanVleet, to varying degrees of success, try and fill into the role of Siakam. The philosophy of
HELIOCENTRISM
is to limit the possibility that the ball could end up either ending in a turnover or end up in the wrong hands for a shot. 55 to 70% of your offense is basically funneling through this player, where this player is either assisting or scoring all of those baskets. This doesn't always look pretty, it doesn't always work, but it does one thing: it limits turnovers. Now let's consider two very different offenses, Golden State and Toronto. The Raptors turn the ball over 12.9 times a game. Golden State Warriors turn the ball over 16.9 times a game. Do you see the trade-off? When things are going right in Golden State, they make up for that quite easily with a barrage of three-pointers at a very high efficiency, being anchored by one of the greatest three-point shooters of all time. But the Raptors don't have a Steph Curry or a Klay Thompson, so they do have to lean very heavily into becoming card counters at the table. This is basically Moneyball. Yeah, some nights it's going to get hella ugly like the other night in OT, but you can begin to see why a team might want to lean into playing this way. The Raptors are currently 9th in offensive rating and 9th in net rating. So how do they do this? Two things. They force more turnovers and they commit fewer turnovers. The result is the Raptors have the largest turnover margin in the NBA at negative 4.5. On a night where the Raptors decidedly win the possession battle, you see extreme examples like the case against Miami, where the Miami Heat took 20 fewer shots than the Raptors. The Miami Heat shot 55% and lost the game. The Raptors are finding creative little angles and ways to game the system against the other team. So now I want to tie all of this together and show you how it relates to Scottie, Luka, Kevin Durant, and Pascal Siakam. Pascal Siakam this year has been pretty dominant. 1.15 points per possession is really damn good. Luka Doncic has been slightly better at 1.18. Both players dominate heavily in the mid-range, in the post, take a lot of twos. Scottie Barnes, to his credit last year, was at 1.11 points per possession. This year, with a higher volume of threes and with his touch around the rim seemingly evaporating, and a shooting slump and the ankle injury, Scottie Barnes is down to 0.98 points per possession. That's not great. The efficiency of this type of system that the Raptors are building is very much contingent on who is taking those shots. What's the gap between 1.18 points per possession and 1.15 points per possession? I guess it depends on how many possessions, right? But the math is pretty simple. There are more scoring events in an average basketball game than there are in a hockey game, a soccer game, and a football game combined. In the playoffs, when the game slows down, the team with the best player tends to win. The Raptors found this out the hard way, year after year, bumping up against LeBron. LeBron was a significantly more efficient scorer than DeMar DeRozan. The minute the Raptors swapped DeMar DeRozan for a top 5 player like Kawhi Leonard, they won a championship in the first year, because the system that was in place around DeMar basically was tailor-made for a player like Kawhi. You swap the pieces. Sure, the Raptors played a little bit different with Kawhi and Gasol and Danny Green than they did with Jonas Valanciunas and DeMar DeRozan, but in a lot of ways, what they were doing was the same. Putting the ball in Kawhi's hands or DeMar's hands, this is a very big difference over a 7-game series. You might be talking about an extra 20 to 25 points. And in games that sometimes come down to 1 or 2 points, 25 points over a 7-game span does change the series.
Fourth-quarter points by Kawhi Leonard.
I mentioned before that Luka Doncic scores 1.18 points per possession, that Siakam scores 1.15 points per possession, and that Barnes this year is all the way down to 0.98 points per possession. But Kevin Durant scores 1.3 points per possession. I don't know if there are any math nerds out there, but fire up your calculators. If you start winning the possession battle, if you create a system which is tailor-made around a player who is going to make so many decisions in the offense, swapping a guy like Pascal Siakam for a guy like Kevin Durant takes your offense from 9th or 10th in the NBA and firmly puts it top 3. That is the gap between 1.15 points per possession and 1.3 points per possession, especially when you start playing it out over an 82-game season or a 7-game series. Durant-Siakam is one part of this equation. But what about the other side of this equation, which is Scottie and Luka? So Luka Doncic is not a great shooter. I know that people think he's a great shooter because he hits a lot of these long bombs, but he's not a great three-point shooter. On his career, he is a 33% three-point shooter. This year, he's shooting 28% from 3. Teams love Luka shooting threes because that means he's not going to go in the post. Scottie Barnes, to his credit, is a 35% shooter this year from 3. So the differences are not nearly as glaring as you might imagine. Luka is a very assertive and very aggressive offensive player. Both are about 6'7" to 6'8" guards. They have elite court vision. I do think that Luka is a way better scorer, way more refined, has a way bigger bag, ton of counters. But the way that they generate mismatches in the post and the way that they create space is actually remarkably similar. What I think makes this comparison most lucid and somewhat coherent is the passing. Even if Luka is ahead of Barnes in almost everything offensively, I do believe that Barnes is willing to work hard to at least bridge the gap a little bit by year 4, which includes working on footwork, working on counters, working in the post, getting more assertive on offense. There are advantages that Scottie enjoys that Luka can't even dream of. He is a bigger athlete, he is a longer athlete, he is a quicker athlete, and the fact that Scottie is also going to eventually become a very positive defender for the Raptors, the matchup between these two could be somewhat comparable in terms of impact. So while I'm not sure that the Raptors are interested in trading Siakam for Kevin Durant, and while I'm not entirely sure that Scottie and Luka are comparable players or that Scottie will ever be able to bridge the tremendous gap that exists between the two players right now, I wanted to make this video largely to lay down my thoughts on why I think I might be wrong about the Raptors offense and why there is at least some logic to how they're playing and why they're playing this way. The Toronto Raptors are once again at the crossroads. A homegrown star who has consistently come up short in the playoffs, on the verge of a contract extension that might backfire, in a conference where he's not one of the top 3 players. A team captain and a best friend who may sour in the event of a trade. An emerging star waiting in the wings that you hold on to at all costs. And a disgruntled top 5 player with a checkered injury history who may offer only a sliver of a contention window. Run it back, prey on luck, hope to become one of the few teams in NBA history to win without a top 5 player, or patiently go through the growing pains and hope that the emerging star in question can take an unprecedented jump in time to line up with the current core. The Raptors could contend for a decade as Kevin Durant gracefully passes the baton to Scottie Barnes. Or it could lead to absolutely nothing but a series of playoff heartbreaks. Anyway, let me know in the comments below what you think about this. What do you think about a potential Siakam and Durant swap? Let me know what you think about the Scottie and Luka comp. Am I completely out to lunch, or are you sort of seeing it? Hit subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help the channel out a lot. And check out some of our other videos. That also helps a lot.
What more could you have done to slow Kevin down?
I promise we tried.
The toughest matchup that I've had to deal with.
The most unguardable human that's ever been created.
KD is a certified killer.
He is probably the most elite scorer in NBA history.
The best offensive player in the game.
The narrative is going to be, well, he has to go prove it by himself.